I know I've been kind of talking about psychological boundaries a lot, and I don't seem to be moving off of the topic. And I don't think I plan to anytime soon because I don't know, I'm getting, the spirit is speaking to me, and that's where a lot of my energy is at right now because I realize that a lot of boundaries that really affect people the most are psychological boundaries when you don't have them, I should say. And for me, I can look back at my childhood. And of course, as a child, having psychological boundaries is like that's nowhere in your frame of thought. I mean, even when I established physical boundaries as a child, it was basically because I didn't like people in my space. And I think I was born that way. So physical boundaries, and you see a lot of children, babies who do that. That's why they push people away. That's why they move back or, stuff like that. So I think physical boundaries is something that may be more natural and easier to establish. Maybe not always enforce because you're a child. So people naturally don't have much respect for children. They just assume that children are to be seen and not heard, which is one of those things I hate. When I tell you, that's one of those quotes or whatever you want to call it that I absolutely, when I hear it, it bothers me to my core. Because that is actually expressing and revealing that people don't respect children. People who cater or adhere to that quote, children should be seen and not heard. That is the ultimate disrespect because when a child gets violated, it literally tells them, don't say anything because they're not going to hear you anyway because you're a child. Or however that plays to the child. I know the few times that I was violated as a child, it didn't stop me from saying something. It also didn't stop me from doing something to the person at the time who did it. I was just a feisty child. But I also think it's in my DNA. Being feisty because my grandmother was feisty, my mom is feisty. Well, she passed away. May her soul rest in peace. But back to psychological boundaries. So I would say the first time I really started to exercise and enforce subconsciously, and of course eventually consciously, was with my, psychological boundaries were it was with my parents, because both of them were so toxic in how they communicated to both me and my brother. They yelled a lot. I used to actually wonder if they were bipolar because everything would be great 1 minute, literally 1 minute, and then literally the next second after that minute, they would be yelling at us and it would be for nothing, or just maybe even simply asking a question. I know for me, if I was sad, my mom didn't want to see me sad, but what she would do would be like, why are you sad? What's your problem? Why are you like, and I'm like, seriously, that's how you're going to? So of course that would just rub me even more into sadness or wear me down into like depression, so to speak. And that happened throughout, as long as I can remember, from my early childhood up until when I was probably around 12 or 13. I got tired of it. I got tired of being cowed down or yelled at or talked down to, and I started to stand up, especially towards my mom. because I saw her often, even though I didn't live with her. I mean, that's a whole other story of how I was raised. But my dad, I would see him maybe once, twice a year. And he would have the same reactions as well. Oh my God, he was just as, I'm at a loss for words, but he was just as toxic or flammable as my mom. And I'm not sure if, I think both of my parents were traumatized. My mom started to tell me a little bit of it when she got sick and was in the hospital. I kind of had to fill in the blanks on that. I'm writing my book, and give more details there. But, and my dad, I vaguely heard a story or two with him, but basically none of them have gotten any healing. They don't think they have a problem. They've never apologized for anything except my mom when she got sick once again and was, at the time, she thought she was on her deathbed. I mean, we kind of all did, but she lived 3 years past that time. But they never saw their behavior as bad behaviors. But once I became maybe like 12, 13, for sure, from 13, 14 on, I definitely stood up to them when they would, because it was so triggering that I don't think I know how to internalize things. I think I'm the type of person who, the minute you give it to me, I'm giving it back. And my brother is the opposite. He internalizes, which is why I'm sure that's why he has high blood pressure and other stuff. I don't have any of that. If anything, I've always suffered from low blood pressure, and I think that's because I just let it rip when it needs to rip. So there's no pressure build up. So I'm low. But I'm not taking anybody having hypertension lightly or anything like that. Just, or even low, because that can also be problematic. But I'm just giving you an idea, the type of person I am. So I remember, those particular responses that I gave in my previous video expressing how to go about establishing boundaries and enforcing them, especially psychological ones. I started out with when my mom would yell at me for no reason or whatever, or maybe just simply asking her a question, or I don't know, maybe I was sad and she didn't like for me to be sad around her, and I would tell her, no, don't speak to me like that. Don't talk to me like that. And I remember the first time I did it, her eyes got so big. And I wasn't even scared of what she might do. And that's another thing. I wasn't scared. But to give context, my mom has never put her hand on me to hit me, ever. But she did not like my mouth, and at all, especially when I would check her. So yeah, the first people that I actually had to establish my psychological boundaries with, and all my life was enforcing it with them, because I couldn't really cut them off. I was still under their care, and that's the hardest part, when your parents are the ones that violate your boundaries, especially the psychological one. And I think that's why I'm stuck on psychological boundaries. Not think, I know, because this is what really erodes at people's esteem. It erodes your self-value, your self-worth, your self-respect, even to love yourself is hard when your parents don't affirm you or give you that support. And so even self-love I had to learn on my own. I thought the only one parent who loved me, even though, my dad was toxic, like I said, I thought he did because he said it. my mom didn't really express it, that she loved me. I mean, they always took care of my brother and I financially. I never wanted for anything. And they actually regard themselves as being the greatest parents because they provided for us and we didn't want for anything. And I'm so glad the other day I was watching a Dr. Phil show, and I'm not really a Dr. Phil fan, but I'm a very sensitive person, so a lot of times the spirit leads me to certain things that I need to either learn for that moment or that day, or to give context to something that's probably going on in my life. And I remember there was a mother on the Dr. Phil show, and she kept going on about how she takes care of her children. They always have the nicest things, blah, 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 blah. You know, all financial, all tangibles, all material. And Dr. Phil said, you think that's what being a good parent is? No, you have to meet your children's needs emotionally and psychologically and whatever else he said. But psychology really captures your mental and your emotional together. So, and what a lot of people don't know is that your emotions and, affects everything, not just your mental, but also your physical eventually. Because, like I said, that's one of the reasons why my brother has high hypertension. He still doesn't express what goes on. He represses everything that happens to him. He's always depressed. I mean, I usually get concerned for him a lot because people would ask me, is he okay? Even when he's not going through something, but I feel like he's always going through something because he doesn't really express what he's going through. And there's a lot of people that are like that. I'm just not one of them. And I'm trying to help people to not be that way because it really affects your health. I mean, hypertension is just one way of it, but there's a doctor, Dr. Gabor Mate, that speaks in detail because I'm not a doctor. I don't know if I've established that. I'm simply doing this YouTube thing because of experience, because I see the need for it. For people to have boundaries, I know how it has helped me, and I would like to help someone. But Dr. Gabor Mate, I believe he has a book called When the Body Says No. And I haven't read the book, but I've listened to him speak on it. And it has a lot to do with how trauma affects us and the coping mechanisms that we also develop from that trauma, how that also affects us. Like people, depending on the trauma that we experience, some people turn into workaholics and as a coping mechanism. And when a lot of people do that or become workaholics, you don't practice self-care. And I don't want to quote what diseases may arise or whatever, but things happen to your body. So it's not just, and like Dr. Gabor Mate explains, and I know he's not the creator of the concept of biopsychosocial, but that's pretty much saying whatever happens in the mind happens in the body. It's not separate. Nothing is separate from the mind. Nothing is separate from the body. If it's happened, as a matter of fact, I believe he says if it's happening in the body, it already started in the mind. So psychological boundaries are, I mean, if we ain't getting it at this point, it is crucial to have that established with people, to enforce it, to maintain it for your peace of mind. At least for me, it was for my peace. I never had peace growing up, and at all. I was miserable. As much as I had everything I could ever need, physically, tangibly, materialistically, monetarily, I was a miserable kid. Miserable. And that's a problem because I may have mentioned this before, but I'm not going to stop saying it. But even with my own children, I already knew that I had to break the cycles before I even got pregnant with my son. He's my firstborn. I knew as a matter of fact, I needed to have him. I needed to have him to learn. Well, I was already beginning to love myself, but I needed to have him to be who I am today. He was so necessary for me. And I didn't do it the way society says you should do it. I didn't get married. I didn't care to get married. That's a whole other topic about being married and the whole marriage situation. And a lot of this is going to be detailed in my book because I already wrote it and I'm just have to go over a lot of things. And I just, yeah. Yeah, certain things yeah, it's in my book. But the bottom line is, I wanted to give my son, and I have two children, but it all started with my son because I didn't have my daughter until 6 years later. And I didn't think I would have another child. I thought he was going to be it for me. But details again in the book. But, and I'm not trying to plug a book because there's no book to plug yet, but it has been written. But I'm just saying, if you're ever interested to know any details, who I am, where I come from, I'm writing a book. Well, it's written, it just needs to be edited, and I have to go back and look at stuff. A lot of stuff in there is painful to go back and look at. But just know that my experiences have brought me to where I am. And as I was saying, I knew I had to break cycles with my son, and I needed him. I feel like he saved my life from where I was at. Because my parents, like I said, never felt supported other than financially. That's it. Psychologically, no. Mentally, no. Emotionally, forget it. Never got that from them. And it took me a while to even recognize that the only support I really got was financial. It's funny. I really think, especially with my dad, even though I said I always felt that he loved me because he said it. Even at my age right now, I'm in my 40s, and I realize my dad does not love me, and I know it's because he doesn't love himself or know how to. And of course, because he's had his trauma that he hasn't dealt with. And I excused him a lot because of that when I got into adulthood. And especially when I had my son, because when I had my son, he really changed. But again, like I learned with change, that's why it's better to evolve. That's why this is a channel about evolving, meaning change, if you notice, look at it even with seasonal. It always comes back. When you change, it always comes back. When you evolve, you leave that part of you that needs to be left behind. But change, it revisits. It's like a cycle. It comes back. Like the seasons. You're always going to have spring, summer, fall, winter. Every year. It's, seasons change. That's a cycle. I like for my life to not be cyclical when it comes to trauma or anything that doesn't serve us. So that's why evolving is the goal here. And I know I kind of strayed off. No, my thoughts are just racing a little bit. I always said I was going to do a scripted channel, and I might from time to time, but I'm literally just ripping off the top of my head with everything that's going on. But I really wanted to come on to say in this particular video that my parents were the first ones I had to establish, enforce, and maintain psychological boundaries with, because they violated that part of my world so much. They made me not feel safe at all with them, and they prided themselves on just, not being better so to speak. My mom recently passed away this year, and it was rough. And as much as I had to bury my mom, I lost two parents around that time because my dad became a psycho. My pastor is trying to tell me he's grieving or that's his way of grieving, but he did something that was so horrible. And it brought me back to who he was before I had my son. He volatile, disruptive, bipolar. I'm sure if he went and got checked out, he would probably come up as bipolar. And the saddest part is that my children experienced it. And that wrecked me because I'm trying to break cycles. And all along he'll slip up. He's slipped up. Even though I said when I had my son, he changed. And of course, that's what changes because, like I said, with the seasons, when you think of how it changes, it always comes back. You always have summer. You always, if you live to see it, you'll always have a summer in a particular year. You'll always. So he's slipped up and shown his ass. And I've checked him because I never allowed my parents. So from the time I started to speak up and protect, in attempts to protect my peace and have that psychological boundary, I never allowed them to get away with anything that they did that was disrespectful. And I always tried to not necessarily not let my kids see it, but I'm also teaching my children through them. And I have taught my children boundaries, but I never really had to emphasize the psychological part of it because I'm raising them. And like I said before, when I hear people talk about, oh, children need two-parent homes, and I've said it before that if you have two degenerates known as parents raising children, the child is still going to turn out to be a degenerate or not fare so well. So I always say a child doesn't necessarily need two parents. They need two wholesome parents to raise them. You could have come from a two-parent household who were like the Cosbys, which is rare. Or you could have one badass parent like myself who is divinely prepared and equipped to parent solo. I'm just saying that to say that the idea of a two-parent household is I'm not going to say it's like a myth. Maybe in the Black community it's a myth. But I see it in other communities. If you have so many parents, even with a two-parent household, don't take the time out to do their best as parents. And don't get me to start talking about doing your best, because everyone's idea of parents doing their best when they did the absolute worst. Here's what I want people to get to the point of. The fact that you think that a parent traumatizing you as a child to the point where you grow up needing therapy is your parents doing the best is mind-blowing. Completely mind-blowing for me. That makes absolutely no sense to me, that you could still have the nerve to say your parents did their best. And I already plan to do a broadcast video, whatever you want to call it, on that particular quote or subject matter. But I just wanted to leave that here, that if your parents have violated you in such a way where you had to develop psychological boundaries because they basically traumatized you emotionally and mentally, they did not do their best. And like I'll quote my daughter in saying they did their best at being their worst. And for the other quote that says, oh, well, your parents did their best based on the time that they were raised, and they raised you, or that, with the information that they had at the time. Okay, once again, information was clearly limited, and they were dealing with their own stuff, and for whatever reason, I guess the times didn't tell them they had issues and that they needed to get help, or the times didn't afford them a connection with God, or the part of the Bible that says not to hurt your children. People always want to quote, children should honor their mother and their father, and forget about the part that says parents, do not provoke your children to wrath. So people can miss me with the whole your parents did their best crap, because I'm not buying it anymore. It's bullshit. There, I said it. And I have a whole talk that I gave, or video that I made, that I will post soon, speaking about that very subject. And I think based on what I said, it all is gonna pretty much get to the conclusion that your parents doing your best is bullshit. So if you have one parent who's doing a really awesome job of being mom and dad, or just being just an amazingly great parent, people need to credit that parent. And of course, you're not going to know that you're doing an absolutely amazing job really exclusively until that child turns into an adult, which at that point in time, they've already formulated their own mindset, separate from how you raised them. And, we could debate that, but it would be nice and it would be ideal if everybody grew up in a 2-parent household with wholesome parents that were not degenerate and that really did their best. Their absolute best, not their best at being the worst. Just wanted to put that in there. I fight very hard to maintain my peace so I could give them peace. And I remember listening to another podcast, and this lady was debating a meal. And he said, oh, so you don't believe in a child having 2 parents? And she said, no. I believe that children deserve to have parents who give them peace. And that resonated with me so much, because I've never heard anybody else say it. And I've always been the one, when I hear the 2-parent, I'm like, why are they just saying 2 parents? I know so many people that grew up with 2 parents and they're a mess. We need to be putting in an adjective or something else. It's not just about 2 parents. It's about 2 parents who care enough to give their children peace. That's what it's about. Didn't expect to get emotional. Please forgive me. And I don't think I'm going to be able to recover, so I will leave the video here until next time. to say, if you are a parent or plan to be a parent and you're fortunate to do it with the next person who is responsible for that child, please consider raising your children peacefully. Give them peace. No more trauma. I know Mary J. Blige says no more drama with a D, but we don't need no more trauma. We don't. And I just pray that this is the last time I have an emotional moment. I'm sorry for anybody that this may affect in a not so nice way, but I didn't expect for it to happen either, trust me. And I'm still debating if I should put this up, but most likely I'm going to, because this is a real moment, because this is something that people need to hear. Your children deserve peace. So on that note, peace out. Until the next one. Take care of yourself, and please, I hope somebody's learning something from what I'm doing so far. And just understand that you deserve respect. And in order to get respect, you have to have boundaries. You have to establish them. You have to enforce them. And you have to maintain them. And that is for your peace. Thank you for listening. This is going to be the first time I'm saying it. Please subscribe, like the video, share it. And I'll talk to you another time. Thank you.